G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I am joined by Ben Nash. Ben, how you doing, buddy?
Mate, good to be here.
Hey, awesome. Thanks for coming in. It's even better when we've got Australia's most followed financial planner. Is that your official tag? It's official. Mate, with that comes, what is it? With great power comes great responsibility.
Well, I hope I can live up to the expectations, Aaron.
Excellent, mate. If you are living under a rock, you don't know who Ben Nash is, runs Pivot Wealth. Third book is now out. Now, this is not going to be an infomercial about your book, but there's a lot of stuff that I want to cover off. And, mate, when you've got Grant Hackett, Victoria Devine kind of singing your praises, mate, I know you're a little bit humble like that, but it says a lot about kind of where you come in your journey as a planner, business owner, author.
Says a bit about how many favors I've got to return on the other side of this, I think.
Mate, don't be modest. Look, we've had the privilege of knowing each other for quite some time.
Yeah.
You know, and I've seen you grow as a business leader. I've seen you grow as a person. What's your journey in fatherhood? Mate, we were speaking before, you took three and a bit months off with your family, traveled around Europe. That stuff doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot that goes into
it takes a bit of doing.
Your journey, right? Like setting things up so the team can obviously function without you, keep them operating at the same level. So how are things going personally and professionally for you?
Yeah, look, I think we're starting to hit a good place. I think my business, I started in 2015, so we're just over 9 years.
Yeah.
And look, it's, as you're only a tiny bit less than us. That it's a lot of hours, a lot of time, and a lot of hard work, particularly in the early days. Our kids are both sort of around the same age, and so I don't know how it was for you, but I suspect it is sort of the same, that when you start having a family, it does change the dynamics a little bit and reminds you of the fact that you're not just a work monkey, that there's a life to be lived. And for me, I found that was a good sort of circuit breaker to draw a line in the sand and say, well, you need to not work 80 hours a week. And that's, good and bad. But I think that I've found for me that over the time since we have had kids and the 5 years or so since, that I've sort of pared back on my time, but I've been focused more on the things that really matter. I also thankfully have been able to bring in some really amazing and develop some really amazing leaders in the business as well. And there's absolutely no way you could do something like take 3 months out of the office without having that there. And so I feel really fortunate that we're in that position. Also a lot of work that's got absolutely us into that as well. And we're now at a point where we do have some really great leaders, and that creates the ability for me to work in the areas that I feel like I can add real value to the business, the areas that I enjoy. But it means that it's less sort of cognitive load with that as well, which I'm sure you can identify with, that you sort of like have a lot of things to think about. Even if you aren't running a business, particularly with a young family, there's always a million things to think about anyway. So, yeah, it's sort of changing and for the better.
Well said. Hey, you just mentioned something there that I was going to touch on later. So we'll talk about it now, which is decision fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've found is the less decisions I can make, it's not about wearing the same shirt every day type thing, but the less decisions I'm making, the better things are. And I feel like it goes for everything in life, family, business, financial, for example. Like when you have a plan and you execute that plan, it's like,
yes,
I don't need to kind of overcomplicate things. And I think for you, when you just said that, it's like that penny's dropped for yourself, just going, sometimes less is more. So from when you look at through the lens as a financial planner, always people go, mate, Ben, where should I invest? What should I be investing? How should I be buying? What's the optimum strategy? It's like, hey, mate, why don't we just take a chill pill? Kind of
less is more.
Less is more when it comes to financial planning, which almost flies in the face of like planners and loving complexity and making things overly complicated for the sake of it.
Yes.
Right? Whereas I feel like what you've done, particularly with your books, is it's fairly simple what we need to do here. Spend less, save more, invest better.
Yeah.
And the outcome kind of takes care of itself.
100%. And I think that's why, though, sometimes that people don't engage as much as they should with their money, because maybe it's the fault of finance people or the information online for making it seem like it needs to be really complicated. But it really doesn't. And I think sometimes when people think about, I want to do everything I can with my money or everything I can with investing, they think that means that it needs to be super complicated and super involved, but it absolutely doesn't. And so when I wrote my first book, I started doing a lot of research into the behavioral finance and the psychology side of things, and found that, willpower depletion, decision fatigue, and those sorts of factors that come in. And so we have built all of the approach that we advocate with our clients, and for me with my own personal finances, to do exactly that, to try and systemize your success. That's something I talk about a lot through Virgin Millionaire as well. And I put in there the quote from James Clear's Atomic Habits, which I absolutely love, that says, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And I think everyone, and this is probably financial planners' faults, I think, that say setting goals and you've got to set good goals for your money, and people go, all right, sweet, I've got my goal. But then it's like, then what? Like, if you just got a goal, I want to be a multi-millionaire. If you don't have a plan of attack, then it's not going to work. And if you don't have a system that's going to make that plan of attack, make you able to actually execute on that plan of attack, then it's definitely not going to work. So the more you can systemize your success, that means systemizing your savings, systemizing your investing, systemizing your mortgage reduction strategies, your property investing strategies. It just means less to think about, and then you're going to be more likely to actually follow it through to get the results. And the results are why you do this. As excited as we sometimes get when we're working on financial plans, it's no one really wants a financial plan. They just want more money in their bank account.
That's exactly it.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. So what we'll do is we'll take everyone through the book and the philosophy, but there's one particular chapter. I'm going to jump ahead on one of the chapters that you've got here, which is why rich people need a budget the most. Yeah. And I say this because when I'm talking, especially to our audience, and people that have reached out, first of all, thank you to everyone that's reached out, wanting portfolio reviews or roadmaps done. But the general listener is on some really good incomes. I'm talking, generally we're seeing household, single incomes around that 200K mark, household income sitting 400, 500K as well. And I feel like the money challenges they've just risen to that level of income. Yeah. And what I often feel is lifestyle creep has become the absolute killer of their wealth. So I've got a few things that I wrote down here. They've upgraded their income, which means they've upgraded their lifestyle, which means the holidays have got far more expensive. Yeah. The dinners out have got more expensive. The cars, the clothing, school fees, these are all just compound. They're looking at the end of this, at the end of the month, cash flow going, we're on some really good incomes. I just don't know where it's gone. Yeah. There's not much left over. And it almost feels like they were richer when they were earning 80, 90K than when they are at 200K. Yeah. And it's this paradox of earning more. Yes. And that's why this chapter, to me, I feel like that's one of the big highlights.
Yeah, look, it seems crazy, but 200 grand it's easy to spend. You take tax off the top and you're left with like maybe 130 or something. Then you whack on some daycare fees. That's $20,000 to $50,000 a year, depending on what
private school fees effectively for a 3-year-old.
Yeah, well, it's more expensive than private school for most people. You put on there a mortgage payment or a payment on an investment property, a bit of living expenses, some bills, like petrol. It goes pretty easily. And so, if you want to actually be profiting from your income and getting ahead and finding the money to invest and save, you need to be mindful of that, because otherwise the money does disappear. And I think that the other side of that, and what I was sort of thinking when I put together that chapter in the book, we see a lot of people that are in strong positions and they fall into the trap of thinking that because they're saving a lot, like these are the people that maybe they are suffering from a bit of lifestyle creep, but they're still managing to save at good numbers. And, if you're saving 10 grand a month even, and that seems like a really big number, you're not necessarily going to be rich, because you think of the lifestyle that you're currently enjoying and the lifestyle that you want to enjoy in the future, and the price of a property that you want to live in and how much work it takes to actually become debt-free on that property. It's like what financial freedom is different for everybody, but ultimately what it really is for pretty much everyone is that you own your dream home without a mortgage, and that you've got enough investment income to live your ideal lifestyle without you having to work, without you being forced to work. So you work if you choose to, but not because you have to. And when it comes to money, there's this thing called the 5% rule, which says that you can draw 5% from a pool of investments without eating into capital, like 5% as an income. So that means if you've got $1 million invested, you should be able to structure it to give you an income of about $50,000 a year.
Yeah.
Now, in Australia, the average income is $100,000.
Yeah.
Right?
Which is pretty good as an average income, right?
It is.
Globally.
It's solid. Although, if you're $100,000 and trying to get ahead in Sydney, you're probably struggling. But if you wanted to replace $100,000, so replace the average income in Australia, you'd need to have about $2 million in net investments with after debt, right? Then we've got the median house price. Depends on where you live, but across the country, it's just under $1 million. In Sydney, it's a bit over 1.3 mil. So you're basically looking at 2 mil to replace the average income, 1 mil to replace the average property. That means you need $3 million right now today to have an average property and an average income. And anyone that's saving 10 grand a month, I can guarantee you that they do not want to have an average income and they do not want to live in an average property in the future. So that means, and this is the premise for the book, that you're probably going to need to be a multi-millionaire several times over. And that takes a fair bit of work to get there. Now, it definitely can be achieved with the right approach, but just saving 10 grand a month, if you're not doing something smart with it, or even if you are, may not be enough to get you exactly where you want to be, exactly when you want to be there. So that's why it's like the budget and why rich people need it the most is, firstly, clear feedback loop. Part of it is saving more, but a bigger part of it is knowing your numbers so that you know, well, what is the trajectory that you're on with your money? And then is your plan actually working? Because we're going to assume that you want to put some steps in place to get you from where you are to where you want to be. The feedback loop is how your money is actually working. And that's what a budget and a saving system will give you that. Not to say that you need to pinch pennies, but it allows you to make better decisions, to make fewer decisions, to your previous point, and then to know if you're on track.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I feel like the more people have earned, and it's a real privilege to earn some solid incomes, we're amongst Australia's top income earners. But there was a really good roadmap for like earning 100, 150K to get there, and then the rules have slightly changed when you move out that 250K mark, and and then it's almost like you've got, I don't know, not less in common, but you need to find more people like that are having the same money challenges and issues that you are, without it being outward appearances that appear that you're doing really, really well.
That's right. Well, that's the virgin part of Virgin Millionaire, that it's people that are getting to that level of wealth, but doing it without, like, you're trying to exceed a level of wealth that surpasses probably their parents in a lot of cases, doing it without a trust fund or a big leg.
Graduates that are like, coming out of uni 3-4 years later, they're earning more than their parents have.
Yeah.
Because, they've fallen into a tech startup or a sales role. Now they're earning some serious income and they don't know how to navigate that income.
Yeah. Well, when property prices were like 2 to 3 times the average income, following a strategy of buy a house, pay it off, save money, go down the South Coast every year for a Christmas holiday, like that could work. That could actually work for people. But today that will not work. You're not going to get rich saving money in a bank account. Your cash savings is going backwards after inflation. So if you want to create, a decent lifestyle and freedom for the future, you need to be pretty smart. You need to be pretty tactical, and you need to be on point with this stuff.
Yeah, great. So not a loaded question, but more, I guess, from your perspective, you work, and part of your role is actually working with a lot of financial planners, right? More like a business to business type role. What have you seen that sets, say, Pivot apart and the top echelon of private, financial planners compared to, I guess, the mass market of financial planners?
Well, I think it's sort of to what we were talking about before, that people don't necessarily want a financial plan. They want more money in their bank account. And so I think what we do, and it takes a fair bit of effort to do this, but is to be less focused on the plan and more focused on how we're getting the results. So what are we systemizing? What are the structures that we're putting in place? How are we going to measure it? How are we going to be duly accountable? We keep our clients accountable, but we're also accountable. And that, it sort of ratchets up the focus, I suppose, on what goes into a plan in the first place, because and I'm sure you've seen it with your clients as well, that you have a chat and let's say I'm thinking about doing X, Y, Z or whatever. And you start to get a sense of their position and ask them some questions and think, oh, how much do you think you could save? Oh, I think I could save $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, $5,000 a month, whatever the number is. Yeah. And it's always a nice round number with a whole bunch of zeros on the end of it, and very, very occasionally someone will actually be able to do that and do it consistently. Yeah. But most of the time it's not. So what we do instead is to go, well, actually, let's go line by line through this to go, your income is, $17,634 and your partner's income is this, and then your expenses are this, and this. Oh, have we allowed for travel? Have we put in a budget for when, something breaks around the house and you need to replace it, or, replacing your technology, like all of these different things to make sure that at the end, when it says I can save $4,362, we know that's a good number. That's a solid number that everyone's comfortable that we can really work towards. Yeah. And then we can keep them accountable to that number. And it's not about like that number needs to be the number forever, because it's just a starting point that you can shift around from. And ultimately it's like when something varies from a plan, you need to look at, well, why did that happen? Was it behavior? Was it something out of our control? Was it the plan itself? And if so, do we change anything, or do we change the behavior? Right. Yeah. So I think that's a big thing. Also helping people really get behind the decisions that they're making. I think like old school financial advice is that mahogany desk type setup where it's like you find someone that you really trust and then they just do everything. But I find that, one, I don't really like that. And secondly, I think that for younger people in particular, they want to feel in control. And beyond that, when they do feel in control, when they feel like they're making the decisions, when they feel like they're active, they're typically going to get better results, because most of the people we work with, they're hardworking, high-achieving people. They're results-focused. They're normally kicking butt in their jobs or their work or where they're spending their time. But money is like this black box thing that they just don't understand. But that can be changed. Like all it takes is a bit of targeted knowledge, not just like, do your research because there's too much out there. But when you have targeted knowledge to know what you need to know and know enough to take the next step and be thinking 2 steps ahead, then people get more bought into what they're doing. They're more in control of the decisions. They understand the levers that they've got. They make better decisions because they have to make fewer of them. Yeah. And then it means that they end up getting better results.
Yeah, mate, spot on. Now, I mentioned before, we had the privilege of knowing each other on a personal level. Mm-hmm. And I know you take this compliment, but you've taken care, like you've really put yourself high on the priority list, which is your health and well-being. The rig's looking good, and I know that because you train, right?
Back at you.
But health to me, and I said this before, health is wealth. And I feel like there's a lot of people out there that are probably deprioritizing their own well-being. And I call it wealth being, because I'm like, if you really care about yourself, you'll put your health and whether that's mentally, spiritually, physically, for example, really high on that priority list. How have you gone about kind of putting yourself as a priority, a higher priority?
Yeah.
Kids, business, your team. And then you go, man, I still got to find time for myself as well.
Well, I actually write about this a bit in the book, and it's the first time I actually shared that story, that when we had our first kid, I completely lost focus on my health. So I trained from a young age and always enjoyed being in the gym and strength training and, not super sporty necessarily, but I did make sure that I was, fairly consistent with that at least. And when my wife and I had our first child, that was in 2019, and then COVID hit in 2020, and then I was running a business at that time. There was a lot, trying to deal with a newborn. Then my wife got pregnant shortly after. Wasn't 100% planned, so that was like another dimension. Dealing with COVID lockdowns and the business, and obviously the world. It looked like the world was going to freeze at one point there. So there's the stress of that. Dealing with teams and work from the bunker or come back. Isolation case, close contact, like all of that fun stuff, shut down the office.
Distant memory.
I know. It's like
yesterday.
It's like another world, but that and the business was growing a lot as well, because a lot of people started thinking about their money with COVID, share market meltdown, property, interest rates super low. So there was heaps of activity. And I just really let things slip and put on a bunch of weight, was really inactive. And I basically just made the decision that something needed to change. And I had never used a PT before, and I engaged a PT, and I was like, that's it. I'm going to like lose some weight and get my shit together basically. Yeah. And so I did that. It was really difficult at the start to undo all of the bad habits that I'd created and get things in check. But that was about 3 years ago, and a bit over 3 years ago now. And I've just been consistent ever since. And so at the start, it was like, focus on losing some fat basically, then, focus on getting strong, then trying to be a bit more mobile. And it's like with your money, I was actually just putting together this piece of content the other day. It's like you do 10,000 bicep curls a day. But if you're like morbidly obese, no one's going to notice. You're not going to notice, and no one else is going to notice either, because you're doing the right thing at the wrong time. It's not that it's a bad thing to do. It's just not the most, important thing for you right now. Yeah. And you got to make the right move for the stage that you're at. And so, that was basically lost the weight, really enjoyed it. It was good to be healthy. I probably got to the healthiest that I've ever been, the strongest that I'd ever been, the leanest that I'd ever been. And that was when I was coming up to 40, which is, took a bit of time in the making, but feeling great for it as well. And I think that being a dad is very difficult, particularly with young kids. Our kids are only a year and a half apart, not to mention trying to run a business and that sort of stuff. And so since being more focused on my health, it's definitely made that a lot easier. I'm pretty sure it's made me a better leader in the business, a better boss, a better worker. I feel a lot better. And I think like the last 3 years have been the most effective for us as a business. It's probably not a coincidence that it's the most effective for me as an individual as well.
Mate, well said. Well said. There's such a close synergy and alignment between getting yourself sorted and then getting yourself financially sorted as well. It's the same principles that apply. Yeah. 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 You can't out-train a bad diet, for example, that's right. And you can't fix a budget where you're overspending, for example, as well. And I feel like if you can get one sorted, the other will fall into place as well.
And it's like a self-reinforcing cycle that can go positive when you're being positive. It goes negative when you're being negative as well. It's like when I got out of shape, I grew this super long beard. I had a man bun. I think I wore pants with a drawstring for like 2 years. I didn't put on a pair of pants that had a belt on them, like downward spiral. And then you get, you start getting some positive progress and you're like, oh, maybe I'll take care of this a little bit better, or, do these other things. And it goes the other way. It's the same with your money. You spend a little bit too much and then you end up in a bit of credit card debt, and then you end up making other bad decisions, and you're just like, oh, that thing's just too hard. Bugger that. I'm not going to be smart. I'm not going to even worry about that tax planning thing that I could otherwise do. Whereas when you start getting things working in the right direction, you're like, well, actually, I'm the sort of person that, makes the most of their money. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to put in that extra bit of effort, and I'm going to, talk to the mortgage expert to make sure I'm on top of my mortgage, and I'm going to make sure that I've got all these other bits and pieces in place. It's like you want to make sure that you're on the up instead of the other way. But unfortunately, with money, like with health, like with relationships, career, a lot of important things, that it's the easiest thing to do is the thing that's the opposite of what's going to get you the results that you want. And so, it does make it tough, but you've got to be focused on the end outcome and the why, and sort of reframe your thinking away from that immediate like dopamine pleasure hit that you get from just like smashing a bag of chips on the couch watching Netflix, and retrain it to be when you go and do a workout or go for a run or have a great family meeting or whatever,
I love it. And to me, I find that's when a lot of people level up, is when they take care of their fitness and their finances really fall into place. Like they're a changed person.
Yeah,
and you can just see like their enjoyment goes through the roof as well. They're really confident with life decisions. But I think also, to your point, it's this stage in life. When we talk about seasons in life, young kids, it's a real season. And financially, hemorrhaging at some point, especially when you've got two kids in daycare.
Yeah.
And for us, our partners then trying to find a rhythm and a feet. For example, usually workplace participation drops back a bit. Onus then falls on, say, maybe a working parent to then pick up the income as well. And you still want to keep the wheels turning financially. You don't want to go back. You don't want to go backwards during this time. The world's moving with or without us. So financially, you still need to stay in the game. And I'll say this constantly, time and time again, which is then parents, one child, second child, they think about buying a home. But you and I both know it. One, single income, 2 or 3 dependents in a bank size, if you've got a non-working partner, versus double income, no kids that's the sweet spot for an income to then get into the market, to then be buying and you're going to the wilderness for the next couple of years as well.
That's right. Yeah. And that's the really the core premise of the Virgin Millionaire book is about those different stages that people move through. And, obviously an extreme example, that bicep curls, if you're overweight, not going to work. It's the same as like, tax planning or sorting out your super is a good thing to do. But if you're at a different stage or you're going through that, or buying an investment property is great, but if you're in the thick of it, we call it the trough of sorrow, where you've got the kids in daycare and you've got your incomes down, and trying to sort of get ahead, that's not going to be the right move either. And so I think that I have been a financial planner for a bit over a decade. I've helped a lot of people in that time, and it's something that we sort of innately know, and I'm sure you see it in the work that you do with clients as well, but I had never really codified it before. And so when I started writing this book, I was like, what actually holds people back? And it's actually in what they don't do. It's in what's missing, rather than, because these days I think people know that you need to save, that you need to invest, that they're keen to do that. There's a willingness there, but what's missing is that people get sort of sucked into this conventional wisdom, or everyone's got an opinion about money, like you should do this, you should do that, all of these things. They don't realize that while there's always a lot of things that are things that you could do, and there's a lot of those things that are good ideas, good in like absolute terms, that there's only a small number of things that are going to move the dial the most for you, that will have the biggest impact for you. And understanding what those are and being focused on them at the right time is going to allow you to level up through the stages. You've just mentioned a perfect example there, that it's like, if you want to get ahead with your money and you're thinking about starting a family. Now, I love family. I reckon family comes first. And, sometimes you go, well, I'm not going to say no to that to do these other things. But for a lot of people, you might go, well, actually, we're keen to start a family and we want to do it in this sort of time frame. What are the things that we should be doing here in order to do that? Yeah. And finding, the right number to spend on an investment property and getting that happening sooner, and getting it to the point where you can comfortably service that debt through the trough of sorrow, so that you don't end up under more pressure than you're going to be under some pressure. Sorry, guys. But, you don't end up under too much pressure. That allows you to come out the other side. And while you may have been sort of treading a bit of water in some areas, you've got some nice property equity growth that you can then go, and then you take the next step. Cash flow's good. Let's use that equity, go buy another one. And then you're like 10 steps in front of the person that goes, oh shit, we should have really done that, but we didn't. And then it doesn't make sense to do it while you're going through that cash flow crimp. And then you're on the other side, but then you got to start from the start again.
Correct.
So you find those few things, the dial movers, and take those steps sooner. Then you get to the next stage. And then another set of like smart decisions gets unlocked, and then you focus on them, and it's going to mean more progress.
Mate, well said. Well said. If anyone's owned property, they go, property equity was the easiest money I've ever earned.
Yeah.
Not had to do much. Obviously, I had to get into the market, and I say the market rewards action takers and decision makers. I'll stand by that. But then there's sweat equity and there's property equity.
Yeah.
And you and I both know, and I've got multiple business owners that I work with, even if you're in a salaried role, and what it takes to move into that, call it a 50 grand pay rise or a 100 grand pay rise, for example. There's a huge amount of sweat equity that comes with that. If you're running a business, then it's another team member, or it's an extra set of costs, or more marketing, for example, or new product development. When you have a property, you've literally just got to be a little bit patient.
Yeah,
get the property revalued. And we're
nothing.
talking about a 50K uplift when you've bought well and you bought correctly.
100%.
And I'm telling people, I'm like, property equity wins every day over sweat equity, and sweat equity gets you to the point that you can go and buy properties. You and I, the first few years of sweat equity, the flywheel effect has meant that, the next few years has got a little bit easier. We know how to kind of move the needle in our businesses with smarter, less less decisions to make. But when people are trying to get into the market, I'm like, buy smart, buy well, buy what you can in a good growth location, and that property equity is going to outweigh that sweat equity every day of the week.
Yeah, look, there's not a lot of free rides when it comes to money, and not to say that property equity, as you say, it's a reward for decision making and action taking.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
But it is, once you get it moving, you the best thing you can do is actually nothing. You just let it grow. And this is for people that are switched on with this stuff. I'm not a huge advocate for people owning, a dozen investment properties. I think that that's overkill. Maybe if your financial position supports it and you are really interested in it. But for most people, 2, maybe 3 or 4 really good quality premium investment properties around $1 million in value, you're going to get some huge equity growth. All you need to do is just keep them there, and that's going to make it so much easier for you to do everything else. And
having said that, though, when you go to scale like $1 million property, for example, you do need a borrowing capacity that's going to support that type of growth, right? And when we're talking about Virgin Millionaires, so these are growth plans that are reserved for usually people that are on some pretty good incomes that can scale a portfolio up, right?
Yeah, well, like obviously there's 2 sides to the equation when it comes to borrowing money. One is your serviceability. The other is your deposit and funding
equity,
in the equity side of things. So if you've got property behind you, you've got the equity that can cover a lot of the deposits. Then you need the income to be able to borrow, or the structuring to support that as well. And so you can use different tax structures that can facilitate some of those levels of borrowing in a way that's easier for most people. But it does require some good advice and strategic planning at the start, because when it comes to property, it's like you only really get one shot at it. And we, for anyone that's got goals like that, like a lot of times that they don't realize what their limitations are until they get to the point where it's like they've capped out at servicing, and then they've probably come to you and go, well, what can I do? I can't do what it is that I want to do. And they don't realize that if they would have been a bit more strategic earlier on, that they may have had more options that are available to them. And that's why I think it's important that you know what your next step is. You got to be focused on that step, but you always want to be thinking 2 steps ahead, or make sure that you've got, one of the things I talk about in the book, that you got the right dream team around you. You got the broker, you got the advisor, you got the tax plan and the accountant, because they're going to know the things to look out for. So if we see someone comes to us and they're in a strong position and they seem like they've got big goals and something like that might be on the radar, we say, well, if this is important to you, this is one way that it could happen in the future. And so that might actually change the decisions that you're making now. Maybe instead of buying a property in your own name, maybe buy it in a trust. And then it creates a little bit of quarantining. And I know that you need a pretty cracking mortgage broker to be able to play that puzzle game with the banks and stuff, but it can 100% be done. Just depends on what are the goals, and the key is really starting at the start, or starting as soon as it comes into your radar. And that's why obviously the people listening to your podcast have 2 steps ahead already.
That's why I love it. I mean, when they're going to lend us their ears, like the best thing we can ever do is give them as much info as we can, make it worth your while when you're tuning in, and that's exactly a great point. And there's a chapter in the book which says, not all property wisdom is wise.
Yeah.
Do you like this one? If we can just double down on it a little bit and go, take us through what some of the financial fallacies or property pitfalls that you see that it's almost like watching this happen in real time going, that's not going to serve you well.
Look, I probably would have liked to have called that chapter "Most of the Property Wisdom Isn't That Wise." But I didn't want to offend too many people. But look, I think that there's a lot when it comes to property that can really hold people back. One of the big ones, we're just talking about equity growth, and for you to benefit from equity growth, you've got to have a good property. That's the first and most important thing. And I think people, it's not that they don't want to buy, like everyone that buys an investment property, they buy a property that they hope will increase in value. But I think that people get sort of sucked into this, I don't know, the way that property's worked in the past, or maybe, people in their ear, or maybe that it's the inner investor that works against you when it comes to buying shares and stuff as well, that you're hoping to get quick returns in a short amount of time. And people talk about hotspots. They talk about,
growth location.
The airport's going in. The mining investment is coming in. And it's like, guys, if you want a property, if you're 30 or 40 and you want a property that's going to create serious wealth, you should be aiming to buy a property that's going to go up strongly for the next 2 decades, 3 decades, 5 decades. And when you do that, you know that the next 10 years is going to be fine. The next 5, as you build that equity, that's going to be good. But people, they're trying to make more money or trying to do things differently.
How can you build it as quickly as possible?
Yeah.
3 properties this year, 4 properties. Like, how fast can you go as opposed to it's quality over quantity?
Yeah. And it doesn't take much Googling to get pretty quickly caught up in all of there's so much conflict in the property market, as you know, like people with hidden or maybe not so hidden agendas, conflicts of interest and those sorts of things. And it's like, well, of course, when you put your numbers into their growth calculator and they tell you that you're going to buy all of these properties over a short amount of time, which you're just going to so happens to be that you're buying off their brother-in-law's cousin developer or something, like, yeah, you're going to make all this money, but are you really? Probably not, right? Whereas you buy a quality property in Bondi. I use that example in the book. Everyone knows Bondi, but it works for, Mossman, Surrey Hills, the Inner West, Redcliffe, the Toorak, the quality areas, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, strong population growth, limited supply, they're hot demand, they're largely got zoning restrictions that you take Mossman. I think that they've approved 1 property development in the last 150 years or something, that there's not more properties getting built. And so the properties that are there, because the population is growing, that they have to be more in demand over time. And so that means when you buy a property that looks like that, you're not going to get a bargain. You're not going to swoop in and get some hectic discount and make a whole bunch of money quickly, unless you get really fortunate with your timing. And that happens sometimes as well, because our property market can deliver that. But at the same time, you're not going to get the declines. Like we've seen last year, we saw the property market went down. Yeah. You saw the premium locations went down by a lot less and they bounced back a lot more and a lot faster. And then they're now way better, where you've got people in these more in the growth areas and they're like, not growing. They're going backwards. So I think choosing a quality property, avoiding that noise, not thinking that you're going to go in and make quick money, that goes a long way. Yeah. The other side, and it's sort of related, but is this positive gearing property thing as well, like this noise that's out there online. And
I think that's largely fueled by the fact that that's the only way to really ramp up serviceability. If your income's, you've seen income, they call it growth. There's no growth in it. So income stagnation, for example. So the only way really to move the needle on borrowing capacity is higher yielding / positively geared investment properties, right?
Yes, but how much does that really, like when you throw a property into the mix, and even when the yield is positive, the banks are shaving the servicing. Yep. You've already consumed a bunch of your servicing on buying the property in the first place. So it's like you'd actually probably be better off finding a way to just have a quality negatively geared property, and you need less of them and less borrowing to get more growth. But you have the same people that we've been talking about, good incomes, strong surplus cash flow, and all of a sudden they're buying an investment property that's giving them $100 a week positive cash flow, but they've just compromised on the growth that they're going to get over the decades ahead. And so, we're seeing at the moment, Perth and Adelaide have been kicking off in terms of the growth on that market. And you look at the growth rates over the last few years, and a lot of them are upwards of 10%. And that's like people are making money there for sure.
Absolutely.
But I looked the other day at the 30-year growth rate, and there's a bunch of areas in WA and South Australia that have growth rates above 10% a year over the last 3 years, and have growth rates below 1% per annum over the last 30 years. So I shudder to think about the amount of people that are getting sucked into this hype that's happening in those property markets, and looking at the fact, Sydney property's crazy. Surely it can't keep going up. Melbourne's the same. Now Brisbane as well. I'm just going to go buy a property over there. It's done 10% a year for the last couple of years. I'm going to get behind that. But I don't think that that's going to be sustainable, because they just don't have the fundamentals in the market. They've got tons of supply and they've got limited demand, because the population is not growing by anywhere near the rate that you're seeing on the eastern states. And I think people often don't realize that most of the time, not all, but most of the time, the balance between your growth and your income return, you're sort of swapping one for the other. And so the premium blue chip properties in the eastern states, you do compromise a bit on your income, but you make it up in terms of growth. On the other side of the equation, you've got a little bit more income, but you got a lot less growth. And if you don't have equity growing and you've used up all your borrowing capacity on a property that's not growing, but maybe throwing you off a very, very low cash flow return, it's not going to get you wealthy.
So yeah, I mean, when we're talking incomes of 100, 150K plus, the extra $100 a week isn't changing your life.
Do anything, and it's taxable, and it's taxed at a high rate anyway. And the people have got the money that they could direct to a really quality property that's going to deliver them leveraged growth. Leveraged because they're using the bank's money to invest as well. It's going to be a much, much bigger return. The Sydney markets over the last, I looked at 10 years, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, 6.7% per year. Adelaide and Perth is like 4%. And so on a $1 million property, you're talking about $20,000+ difference every single year.
Yeah. Compounding though.
Yeah, exactly. And so maybe you're getting your $5,000 a year in cash flow, but you're still 15, 20 behind, but plus it's exponential because of that compounding effect.
Yeah, you're leaving dollars on the table. So I feel like you've won here, but you've lost here. And I guess hindsight's the only way to really figure this out, right? And this is where generally a lot of financial decisions make sense. It's in hindsight as opposed to foresight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you've been there, but I know I have bought a property, didn't perform that well, didn't lose me money, but it also didn't make me any money, chewed up a bunch of borrowing capacity. We've seen this a lot with our clients as well, that they'll buy a property and buy another one. You learn some lessons. Sometimes they don't cost you too much, but it's often cost you time. Yes. And that's the cost that you can't get back.
Yeah, it's real opportunity cost when you've sunk your money somewhere else. And I think it's also takes away confidence. Especially when you've got two partners coming into it. Yeah. One partner, once bitten, twice shy. They're a little bit now cautious to then go in. And it's like,
then they're like, property doesn't work. Oh, no, that just cost me money. Oh, I won't do it. And then they're waiting. And then it's like another good opportunity for buying property comes up. Oh, no, that doesn't work. Then all of a sudden you've seen another like mini boom or a full blown boom. And then they're like, shit, I missed out on that. Could have made all that money there. So yeah, it's hard to avoid if you've been in that position, but know that it's not about property. You got to have the right property.
With this, and you probably deal with a lot of couples as well, like dual income households. It's usually one person that takes the lead financially, which means they're listening to the podcast, they're reading your book, for example, and so they're so far ahead in terms of like their own personal education. And once, they're dragging the other person going, come on, we've got to go see Ben or the team at Pivot, for example, or check out this podcast. But they spend all these hours self-educating. How do you take a partner on the journey with you so you both, because the way I look at it is, and I've said this numerous times, well, you can't build a house off two different blueprints. So you've got to get alignment, financially, life-wise, for example. And if one person's, a little bit hesitant, negative, holding back, for example, and someone's streets ahead with their own education, how do you temper that to go, how do we both get on the same page?
Yeah, look, I don't know that there's an easy solution or a one-size-fits-all approach with that. It probably depends on your partner, your position, and the relationship. And, I think I qualify as a financial expert these days. I'm certainly not a relationship expert.
Go hand in hand very well.
Look, I think that firstly, I think it's important to recognize that if someone is not as knowledgeable in any area, that you want to sort of be gentle about that, because particularly about money, I think that there's this weird extra layer with money that because everyone has some money, that we fall into this trap of thinking that like money should be easy because you're getting money paid into a bank account every week and it should just be simple, but it's not simple. It's its own area of expertise or speciality or whatever. And so I think that you probably want to try and find common ground and find a way to move forward. Now, if you're an astute sort of people person and you can navigate that on your own, then please email me hello@pivotwealth.com.au and just let me know what those tips are. But I suppose if you don't, then having a mediator, i.e. a great mortgage broker, a great financial advisor, can help to make you not the person that's having to drive this. Because I think that It doesn't always work like this. Like, I don't think it's really a gendered role in that, like, it's always that males or it's always females are the ones that are more of the driver around money. But a lot of the time, I think that it is probably more common that the people that are more involved in the money are the ones that have the higher incomes. And so that's automatically more pressure on the higher income earner or the person that's in control of the money. And if it's the higher income earner that's also in control of the money, then it's sort of like double pressure on them. And typically, and I know I feel this as well, that you feel a lot of responsibility for making good decisions, for being the one that gets the money, working in the way that it's needed for your family and your couple or your family to be able to live the lifestyle that you want. And so if you then add to the mix that you're trying to tell your partner what to do and that, don't do this and do this instead, or don't spend this money and, do that instead, that can be difficult from a relationship perspective, firstly, but also it's a hell of a lot of pressure on that person as well. And so I say that, every person has their own goals and their own preferences, but then every couple you've got couple goals, right? You've got your joint goals. And commonly when you go through a process with the couple to set your couple goals, that commonly, not always, but commonly people are prepared to be flexible on some of their personal goals so that they can set good goals that they both agree on as a couple.
Yeah.
And so I think it's actually just about actually going through that process and going, look, I've got these 5 goals for me, but there's really 3 of them that are really crucial to me. There's 2 that I can flex on. Maybe one of them's inconsistent with my partner's 4 goals that they've got, and 3 of those are non-negotiable. So this is now what we're going to set together. Most of the time, your goals are going to be broadly the same because that's how you end up in relationships, because you've got a level of alignment, in stuff. So you probably hope that you don't, come at it from completely opposing sort of outcomes that you're working towards. But yeah, when you do that, then all of a sudden that you sort of change the game, because it's no longer that you're saying, oh, this is important, we need to do this. It's like, well, no, hold on a sec, that's your goals. Let's agree on what we're doing together. And then you can work towards those things together. So that takes a fair bit of the pressure off. And then it's like it makes you back as a team as opposed to one person pushing or dragging the other person around, which I think is better. Look, I love my wife to death, but God, she hates being told what to do. So I'm like, for me, it's like,
I'm married to my wife. Are you?
I'll happily like put someone in the middle so that I don't have to be the person. It's like, all right, well, let's just figure this out and we can agree, but then let's agree and let's move forward with what we've agreed.
Yeah. I guess that's the question I want to ask before the chapter that you titled, You Need Debt to Get Rich, because this is one part that I feel becomes a source of contention for couples, which is, I just want to pay off the home. And then when we get that, then we'll think about taking more investment debt. And it's like, goes to your point earlier around, hang on, some things need to run in parallel. You need to be paying off your mortgage and you need to be investing for the future, because, time, not that it's your enemy, but it could be your greatest ally as well.
Yeah, 100%.
And so when one partner's going, no, we just need to have a mortgage reduction plan, and the other's going, we need to invest for the future, it can feel like competing priorities, but you absolutely do need debt to get rich.
Look, I think that that when it comes to whether just paying down your mortgage is right, or most of the time it's not, and as you say that you do need to be investing, but preferences are one part of it, but the numbers are another part of it as well. And this is why, like, at the core of the financial planning that we do with clients, we simply financially map out, if you keep doing exactly what you're doing right now, this is what the future is likely to look like. This is where you're going to be in terms of your mortgage, your savings, your investments, your wealth position, and then what that means for your ability to spend the way that you want to spend on your ideal lifestyle. Yeah. And so, if paying down your mortgage is something that you want to do, and if in doing that you are still going to be financially where you want to be in the future, then that's an option that's seriously worth you considering. Yeah. But almost always you will be better off by investing while you pay down your mortgage. The simple way to invest without debt is with equity, so like shares or ETFs or managed funds. I sort of put them all in the same bucket. Yeah. And because of the fact that equities deliver like compound returns, and the long-term return on shares is higher than the interest rate that you're paying on your mortgage, that generally you are going to be better by investing. But when you borrow to invest, so you use leverage, particularly when you're doing it with property equity where you're not even having to stump up any of your own cash savings, then you are going to get ahead a lot faster. The downside is that it comes with a cash flow cost. I already went on the rant about premium properties and how it is going to cost you money. You're not going to get a positively geared property, particularly when you're borrowing against equity to fund the full purchase price plus your costs. And so that has an impact on your risk levels. It has an impact on your cash flow, and therefore it has an impact on your lifestyle as well. And so it's about really understanding those numbers. And I already know, that's the approach that we look at all these different scenarios for our clients. Before we even fire up the tech, I already know what strategy is going to make the clients the most money. Yeah. It's borrow as much money as you can possibly get your hands on and load up into investment properties. That's always going to be the best from a wealth building and asset building perspective. It's also going to be the worst from a cash flow perspective, and it's going to be the worst from a risk perspective as well. But no debt is lazy. It's a little bit lazy, and it's probably not going to get you to where you want to be. And so if maximum debt is too much and bad, and no debt is bad, what that means is that, and I talk about this in the book, that for every person, if you can find that sweet spot, a debt that gets you to where you want to be, but that you're comfortable with, that is going to get you maximum progress, but without any more stress than it needs to be. And so the numbers, I think you can let the numbers show you what's possible. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're not, because everyone wants what they want. And then the numbers say something as well. And your wants are important, but they're not the only important thing. The numbers are important, but they're not the only important thing. The right thing is the balance between the two.
Nicely said. Yeah, I usually say to people, I'm like, there's a sleep at night factor. You sort of find what that is. And particularly as a couple,
100%.
The last thing you want is, I guess, money to get in the way for a healthy, stable relationship. Now, there's always been some friction at some point. You push through that. And once you get to the other side, usually you go, right, that wasn't as bad as we thought it would be.
Yeah.
And you got to be at some point happy that you've taken some action and made some decisions along the way.
Yeah. And look, and I think if you're particularly debt averse, then just start a little bit smaller. Then that means that it's because you'll typically get more comfortable with it when you've got more exposure to it. Once you see it, you see that it's working.
Get a bit of success with the property being revalued, or 12 months later, you're like, oh, it's not too bad.
Then maybe you buy a $600,000 investment property instead of an $800,000 or an $800,000 instead of $1 million one. And you start there, you get a bit comfortable, you build your understanding, you build your comfort levels, and then you can follow the bouncing ball from there.
Yeah, beautiful. Hey, mate, I jumped on a plane recently, saw this bad boy at the airport. I want to say congratulations. So I'm holding a copy of Ben's new book, Virgin Millionaire, which is your third book. So you've been a busy boy. I thought you said, mate, you had kids. I don't believe you, mate, writing 3 books. Mate, I'd say this is a really good read. I won't say easy because there's some good concepts in there, but a good quality read, mate. So well done. Kudos to you.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate that.
So what we'll do is I'm going to put you on the spot here. Is what we might do is give away a couple copies of your book.
Okay.
If that's all right.
Yeah.
So if you've found this episode helpful, we love when people drop us a DM and saying that, you found this episode helpful. So let us know what you loved about it, and we'll give away a few copies of Ben's new book. And then also I think we might even have a couple of copies of your previous 1 or 2 books. So if we run out of that, we'll make sure there's a few copies there. Awesome. Thank you very much, Ben. And how do people get in touch with yourself and the team at Pivot?
So Pivot Wealth website is probably the best way. You can check out a bit more. There's a bunch of resources and stuff on there as well. That's just www.pivotwealth.com.au.
Yeah, great. Last question, actually. Someone younger, I'm looking behind the cameras here. We've got Grace. She's probably too shy to put but she's 20-something, mid-20s.
Yeah.
Maybe not having the financial resources to engage fully with a financial planner. Yeah. How does someone like that enter, say, the Pivot ecosystem, or what's a great way to dip their toe in the water?
Well, we've got our own podcast, so it's called Mo Money. You can look it up on all the podcast platforms as well. And so there's a bunch of different topics that we cover on there.
Yeah.
Also do a heap of content on socials. So Pivot Ben on Instagram, Ben Talks Money on TikTok. There's a whole bunch of stuff on there. Plus, we also run pretty regular live online events as well. So on topics like we've got one coming up on investing for your kids, or getting started for the new year as well. That we've put out a bunch of stuff to help people sort of capitalize on that new year momentum. The books are obviously part of that as well. And we do also have a digital accelerator, essentially called the Smart Money Accelerator. So check out all the details on the website for that as well. But it's more like education with coaching, Q&A sessions and those sorts of things to help you save and invest more. But do it without the price tag of like full-blown financial advice.
Excellent. Yeah, I feel like the accelerator is probably that little gap there, which is a stepping stone to get into financial planning. It's like if you're a little bit curious, you want to scratch the itch, it's probably a really good place to start.
100%.
To then take the leap of faith.
Obviously, I'm completely biased. But
mate, you are, but I think that's why we bring you in here, mate, because you know what you're doing. So, hey, guys, if you loved it, let us know, mate. We love the comments that are coming through. We love the DMs as well. Like I say now, if you're on the start of your journey, we're doing property roadmap sessions, which is how do you get started. And like Ben said, is how do you be 2-3 steps ahead with your property investing journey, or if you've already got a portfolio and you want to kind of optimize things, then we do a property portfolio session where we kind of pop the hood on it, see what's going on from an equity and borrowing capacity perspective, and start to do some proactive planning to help you scale up your portfolio. So Ben, thank you very much, mate, for coming in. Really appreciate it. Like I said, mate, check him out on the socials. He's an absolute gun on there, but also spitting out a lot of wisdom as well, mate. So thank you very much for jumping on.
Appreciate it. Cheers, Aaron.
Awesome. That's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in.